In sports, the scoreboard doesn't tell the full story, but Netflix does. Stories about dads who happen to be world-class quarterbacks and a battle for the heart, soul, and direction of the multi-billion-dollar business of F1. Whether you're a diehard fan or you're brand new, Netflix has the stories for every type of fan. You can watch these incredible sports stories like Quarterback, F1 Drive to Survive, Untold, and many more now on Netflix.
This episode is brought to you by Columbia Sportswear. It's snowing again, and that wind chill is killer. But you're not worried about that because you shop the Omni Heat Infinity Collection. It's warmth perfected with tiny gold dots that reflect your body heat inside and protect you from the cold outside. No snow or chilly temps can stop you now. Go out anyway. Shop the Omni Heat Infinity Collection now at Columbia.com/infinity.
Apple Card is the credit card created by Apple. You earn 3% daily cash back up front when you use it to buy a new iPhone 15, AirPods, or any products at Apple. And you can automatically grow your daily cash at 4.15% annual percentage yield when you open a high-yield savings account. Apply for Apple Card in the Wallet app on iPhone. Apple Card subject to credit approval. Savings is available to Apple Card owners subject to eligibility. Savings accounts by Goldman Sachs Bank USA, member FDIC. Terms apply.
Serie Chronicles is a Media Chronicles production.
Hello and welcome to our first Chronicles Q&A of 2022. It's me, Nikki Bandini. It's Mina Rizuki alongside me, and we have got a mailbag full of your questions to get into to start the new year. So let's dive right on into it. Mina, the first question I've got here, actually, I think we're going to just say we answered this one on the main podcast, which is, could you please clarify the COVID protocols, in particular, who has the authority to postpone a match? Why did Inter have to turn up to Bologna's ground when we all knew the match wouldn't go ahead? Sam in Amirati in Australia asked that question. We did address the COVID protocols on the main podcast for this show, just to sort of, I guess, to answer the second part of that, which maybe we didn't get into as much on the show. Inter had to show up at Bologna because the league's rules at that time, because we hadn't had any sort of clarity, you hadn't had this sort of meeting between the Italian Football Federation and the government at that time, that was just what's expected of them. The league had never postponed this game. So what happened was Bologna were told by the local health authority, the ASL, you can't go to the game. Inter were going to the game as they were supposed to. Serie A never cancelled the match, so Inter have to show up, otherwise they haven't shown up. And so they show up, they pretend to play a game, and then the ruling comes afterwards. That's just the order that things have been done in. That's what happened, for instance, with Juventus Napoli last season, with Lazio's game against Torino. Because it's competing authorities, it's the health authority telling them to do something, not the Serie A telling Bologna not to come to the game. Serie A had chosen this response of just not acting until the game has already sort of, in quotes, been played, and then making decisions afterwards. Hopefully we have some better clarity now with new protocols coming in.
It's a lot of fun to waste everyone's time.
Yes. I mean, it's extraordinary. And this Inter Bologna game was especially extraordinary because Federico Di Marco, they had a training exercise on the pitch to sort of make up for the fact that they'd gone all that way and not played a game. Di Marco actually got injured in that training exercise, thankfully not too badly. So, yeah. So a game that never got played, and still you managed to pick up an injury from it. I did actually write about this as well. If anyone's interested, for The Guardian, just Google my name in The Guardian. You'll find my author page on The Guardian, and I wrote about this on Friday morning about the COVID mess as well. So check that out for a second thing. But otherwise, listen to this week's main podcast. Second question from Kartik in New Delhi. Mina, Kartik wants to know, why has Matthias de Ligt been so prone to giving away handballs? Even if I, as Kartik, felt yesterday's one was a bit harsh, and he really had no option. But can you point out the reason why he's been like this, or is it just bad luck? Mina, I don't know if you have an opinion on whether he's just unlucky, and also if you want to get into that question of whether or not the handball was a penalty in the game between Roma and Juventus. And of course, there was a second incident which could also have been a penalty involving De Ligt and hands.
The second incident, which was one that our producer is particularly grieved by because he's a Roma fan, is one which wasn't given because according to the rules of the game, if the ball ricochets of another body part and hits your arm, then it is not a penalty because it's a ricochet. And that was a law that was changed. And we know that if it's a ricochet, it's never a penalty, even though some felt like actually if we look at just, in the spirit of the game, if you're making your body bigger and there's still a ricochet, it should be a handball. But for the one that was a penalty, I think it was deserved. I think at the end of the day, when you're turning like that, it's clumsy. And so, yes, it's harsh. I think every handball is harsh unless you're doing Luis Suarez against Ghana in the World Cup, which is probably the most blatant form of handball I've ever seen, or your Maradona scoring from the hand of God.
I'm going to take you way off track, Mina. But like that handball, because you always say, everyone, you're the witch, right?
It's my favorite. Yeah.
I would do that handball in a second. Like,
me too.
You've got an option that could give your team a chance of staying in the World Cup. Of course you do. Everyone was so mad at him. I was like,
yeah.
Of course you do.
I was like, I would totally do it. Like, I love you for doing it,
And you accept your red card for it. Like,
yes. Like, what irritates me is like when I was always the person that would like get irritated with Buffon because he was always just a nice guy. And I was like, you'd never do that because you stick to the rules. Yeah. And I was like, I hate that guy. I want the guy that's like willing to die for me, And Suarez was always that guy, which is why I loved it when Buffon got sent off against Real Madrid because it was like, finally, I see the dirty side, But yeah, I would totally do what Suarez did. But unless it's something that obvious, I always feel like handball's a little bit harsh in general, because a lot of the time, it's accidental most of the time. I genuinely do believe that. But if it is clumsy, you're turning your back to the ball, whatever it is a penalty. And unfortunately, for Roma, they couldn't score it. And luckily for Szczesny, he managed to save it, even though he went down too quickly. But I did laugh a little bit about Szczesny because he got applauded, but he did make a mistake. It's just that Pellegrini made a bigger mistake.
It was a terrible penalty, unfortunately, for Roma.
Yeah, it really was. But in terms of like... actually, here's the thing. I think Italian's very good. And I'm talking about even from the 90s of how to defend with sort of crossing their hands behind their back. I've seen that a lot, even from Milan defenders in the 90s. And it's something that, used to get taught quite a lot to young defenders in Italy. And I think that they got very good at it. But obviously, Chiellini is a little bit clumsy with his hands, gives away a few handballs here and there. But De Ligt has been unlucky. I do think that the way that he's learned how to defend is a little bit different in the sense that it is about authority and using his full physique to intimidate opponents. And if you listen to his interviews, he always talks about that. He really enjoys coming up against the powerful players and getting into duels. So that's how he likes to defend. And when you do that, you take more risks of obviously the ball hitting your hand. He's trying to learn a different way, a more Barzagli way rather than a Chiellini way, if you like. But it is obviously an element of luck. But I did feel sorry for him. And another part of me is like, oh, for goodness sakes, De Ligt again, So I'm caught in two minds. What do you think, Nikki?
Yeah, I think this discussion about the first penalty that Roma could have had, and look, it could have changed the game, right? Because it was still 1-0 when that first one happened. It's interesting because going into the laws of the game, there's certainly passages that would lead you to think that because it comes off De Ligt's leg before it hits his arm, that should mean it's not a penalty. I think there's been an interpretation in Italy that's quite common to a lot of the sort of moviola, the video replay columns that you see, which are a huge part of Italian coverage of these incidents and have been forever, long before VAR. And the common feeling there is that that rule doesn't apply because it's not a sort of kicking it onto his own arm. It's he reached his arm out in a way that he shouldn't have, making his frame big to try and block something, and it just happened to deflect off him onto that arm rather than him sort of kicking it. It was just an incidental deflection, and whereas the decision to make yourself wide using your arms was intentional. And I think that's been this really big focus in the Italian application of this law, and it's fascinating still how this law has been differently applied in Italy and different countries. I think you see different applications all over Europe, certainly, presumably all over the world, but I can't follow every league all over the world. And it just seems like De Ligt has not learnt his lesson when it comes to these things, because whether or not that first one should or shouldn't have been a penalty, his mistake is the same. He shouldn't have his arm out there, and he's played enough big games now to know that. He's had enough handball decisions against him to know that. And I honestly, who knows what goes on the training ground if you're not on it, but I feel like coaches should be talking to him about it every day at this point until it stops, because he has given away an extraordinary number of handballs, and he nearly cost this game to Juventus, because they were winning 4-3 and they did give away that penalty, and it was just, as you say, it was a penalty save that got them out of trouble. So it's something that is a flaw in his game, I would say, Kartik, to actually answer your question. Why is he so prone to it? Because he hasn't learned his lesson. And maybe the second one was a little bit harsh, but I felt like the first one was lucky. So swings and roundabouts on that front. Certainly it feels tough to get the second yellow for that one. I think that's sort of, again, the way the rule is written, the referee doesn't have leeway on it. It's a yellow card, but I can see how people feel like that double jeopardy in that situation is a lot.
But he deserved to be sent off for it, and it was a penalty. And you're right, I do think that it's something in his game that he should address and look at. And I do think it's his type of defending, and he needs to find ways. I mean, there came a time when you felt like he learned his lesson. Not anymore. But can I just say that I am watching Torino versus Fiorentina because they're playing on a Monday afternoon while we're recording this podcast. And the third goal is just something. It's a mistake from Callejon, and Brecalao just scores Torino's third goal. It's just, it's fantastic. Fantastic. Anyway, just wanted to say that.
Half an hour in, 3 goals already. That's the sort of round we're having in Serie A. Sorry we were recording before that game got played, but they played it at a weird time.
Yeah. Vlahovic, you would think that Fiorentina would be 2-0 up, but away from home, they're just a terrible team. On to the next question. Do you think Nicolo Rovella on loan at Genoa could be a potential candidate to step into Juve's uninspiring midfield alongside Locatelli? And that's from Dan Vega. Dan from Wales. What do you think?
Interesting case with Rovella. Obviously, Juventus signed him from Genoa in the start of 2021. He's been left on loan there since then. You would imagine that he is at least a player they are considering as a longer term option. I think he's 21 years old. He's played in the Italian youth setup through most of the age categories. He's someone who certainly has all of the right credentials as a young player who's been productive at those levels. But it's hard to be enthusiastic for Juventus, who are trying to kick on and get back into the top 4. It's a team that was winning the Scudetto 9 times in a row. It's hard to be enthusiastic for them about a player who's playing in midfield for possibly the worst team in all of Serie A right now. This is a player who hasn't been able to elevate Genoa beyond really, really desperately poor performances. And look, I would say that Rovella has been one of the best players on that team. And perhaps Andriy Shevchenko, now they got through that horror series of fixtures in the run-up to Christmas, can start to improve things, can start to get more from him. He's a sort of similar sort of hybrid. I'm not saying the same sort of player in the specifics, but in terms of role on the pitch, similar sort of hybrid to Locatelli, in that he's sort of something between a regista and a mezzala. He can do a bit more of that sort of sink deep, probably a bit more of a tackler, but certainly someone who plays with box to box as well. But do I think he's ready for Juventus? I mean, maybe in as much as Juventus don't have a great midfield right now, and why not? But he's on loan until the end of the season anyway. I imagine they'll give him another look over the summer, and perhaps, given the money does need to be invested in the squad elsewhere, he could end up being a solution they want to give a really good look to, because he's already been paid for. But he's not an option that I look at right now and think, yes, there's the solution to all of your problems lying there waiting for you at Genoa.
No, I think you're right in the sense of his profile as well is not necessarily one that I need somebody who has a greater exertion, like better at keeping the ball in tight spaces, less likely to be overwhelmed. We don't know whether if he is surrounded by better players, because he's not right now. He is very much, I think, the shining light other than Matteo Destro for Genoa. And he's obviously already played under two coaches. There's an opportunity now in which people are saying Shevchenko is going to be sacked and then there's going to be a third coach. You know, it's a little bit of a disaster, which means that
are we counting down to Ballardini again? Is that what it is? Is it Genoa? So at some point it's Ballardini.
It's going back to him, right, eventually.
Yeah.
But you do sort of wonder that how can a player progress and learn and develop if every day, like, everything changes? And so it is a problem. And he has obviously had injuries. Concentration is also the thing that I feel like Rovella is guilty of. I don't think that he's somebody that I feel like is dedicated 90% of the time. 100% of the time for the full 90 minutes. There are problems with his concentration. I do think he's been one of Genoa's more standout players, and he is very good at the tackle and off the ball. And I think he's good at taking set pieces as well, which would be a great weapon for Juventus. But frankly speaking, I think, like, you know, Rabiot, who came from PSG, Ramsey, who came from Arsenal, they're not Juve level. I don't know if Rovella is. I'm trying to look at players that are better on the ball, somebody with a bit more experience and leadership skills to play alongside Locatelli. I miss that kind of, you know, I miss a Khedira, a Matuidi, players with a little bit more personality. I would say Pjanic, but he was always overwhelmed. Very much a Roma player. Sorry, guys.
Very much a Roma player. Wow.
I'd rather, like, if I'm going to go for someone, I feel like Fratesi shows more of a character. I'd love to have him in my midfield, you know. Not sure he's necessarily what I'm looking for in terms of a player, but I think if just Arthur can continue these performances, wow. But he's obviously injury prone, and I think there needs to be more in there. But I love a Wijnaldum, for example. That would be my ideal player to bring in, or a Kovacic. But that's what I think would elevate Juventus, and they need to start looking at players with a greater profile and somebody that shows the leadership skills. We can't just keep buying Ronaldos and De Ligts. We need that guy in midfield alongside Locatelli.
That's a really great point about the leadership. Locatelli is, I think, a really talented footballer, but he's not necessarily the player who I look at and think has that sort of character, right? Contrast him even with, say, Nicolo Barella at Inter. And I think Barella is such a, I am in charge of this situation kind of player. Even when he isn't fully in charge, he imposes that personality on things. I'm going to walk into this midfield and I'm going to drag you all with me. And I suppose that's also perhaps a natural consequence of where he was at Cagliari, where he really did have to sort of put that team on his back all the time and hike them along with him. Whereas Locatelli had that start at Milan and then went to Sassuolo and actually was able to build back up with a young team around him that was all moving in a particular direction and had a certain vibe going, a collective vibe. And I think he's really talented. I really like Locatelli, but I think it's a really fascinating point you've raised about character and personality, because I don't necessarily see him as a Barella or even like a Verratti character who you're like, okay, follow me, guys. He's not that sort of character necessarily. And then perhaps that is what Juventus need most of all right now, which sometimes is easier to find in an older player.
Sorry, it's interesting you say that, because I'm not a fan of Verratti. I'd prefer to have Locatelli every day in my midfield. Verratti is just his bark and no bite. Does that make sense? He's like a red card guy, and I'm just like, shut up. Yeah, like just please stop. Like it just annoys me. Yeah. And I feel like Barella is a Duracell bunny. And so when you have that kind of character, it's sort of easier to just tell him to calm down and just, be disciplined, stick to your positions and do what you want to do. He has a natural desire. But actually, incidentally, I do think Locatelli is the smartest of them all. I just think that he needs a player alongside him to remind him of that. So I think he needs veteran experience, but I don't necessarily think he's actually far off in talent when it comes to Verratti and Barella. I would choose him over both of them, to be honest with you. And I know that's crazy because I know you're a huge fan of Barella, and so am I.
I love Barella.
But they're different players as well, so it's difficult to say, And
there's different kinds of leadership as well, right? Because I was just thinking as you were talking, like...
So I was thinking Pellegrini and Senior as well. Lorenzo Pellegrini and Senior.
Well, Pellegrini is definitely got leadership in his character, I think. But Pirlo is someone who, what an incredible midfielder. No one doubted that. And he exerted a certain kind of leadership because when he was on the pitch, you knew that he would be the one distributing. He would be the one deciding how the game was played, frankly, which is a leadership in itself. But he's also not scream in your face leadership, right? And in some ways, that's why Juventus always wanted to put him alongside someone like Vidal, perhaps, who was going to be your more aggressive, like get in someone's face kind of player. And it's interesting the different kinds of leadership that you probably ideally want to make up a football team.
Tonali is, I think, the guy that for me has the most leadership from all of those that I've mentioned. I weirdly think he's the only one I trust that when the chips are down, he can elevate. And Lorenzo Pellegrini reminds me sometimes, I think he's better than Insigne. Sometimes Insigne disappears when it matters, like Dybala. And Pellegrini also has that in his... This is what worries me about the Italian national team, because I struggle to point out like a guy that I think is somebody who, when you think of old school, like, Italian midfielders, your Gattusos, your Di Livios, your Pirlos, like you've mentioned, there was always that, okay, I know what to do. Pirlo will panenka like Joe Hart in the penalties and put Italy back on track. I struggle to see a player like that. I think Barella and Tonali, I see where you're coming from with that. I don't see it anywhere else. I can't think of Pessino or Pellegrini or, this other type of character that says, we've got this. And this is where I worry about the national team.
Okay, but we did just win the Euros, okay? And I'm not letting go of that just yet. We haven't missed out on the World Cup yet, and we just won the Euros, so...
Yes. Yes. I'm going to shut up now.
Last question for today, I think. We've got one from the Hardcore Football Podcast, which is, what makes Roma such an attractive destination for English players lately? Mina, what do you think?
Firstly, I think it's got to be Jose Mourinho. That's huge for them because, it's an opportunity to work with a world-class coach at a club that is and has a nice project that they're trying to launch that are looking for value and talented players. I think that Chris Smalling came and very much changed his reputation at Roma. He was sort of frowned upon when he was at Manchester United. He didn't necessarily feel very happy about the way that he was playing the game. And he found his authority and his power and his strengths at Roma. And I think that he's an important and integral cog in their defensive system. And you do feel his absence when he's not there. And seeing how much Smalling has improved himself from a defensive point of view, that is huge. But I think in general, like, I don't want to just say it's Roma, but Serie A has become an attractive destination for a lot of English players, because Fikayo Tomori is such an important player for Milan. I think that obviously you are going to look at Tammy Abraham and Chris Smalling, but you look all across and you can see that English players right now are making the difference and are choosing to come to Italy to have an opportunity to play with everyone. When you see like Lukaku has come in, Ronaldo's come in, both of them, obviously Lukaku did tremendously after that stint in Manchester United, in which he was constantly criticized, and really found himself and in turn became one of the best strikers in the world. And I think having that opportunity to show yourself off, but also in Italy, there is still that desire to teach football from coaches. that's not necessarily something that Premier League coaches still do. When they're talking about Manchester United, for example, that doesn't happen. No one teaches you football. You're supposed to already know what you're doing. But there is still that element of still learning. Every day is a school day. And that is, I think, what's important about Serie A, because it does help you progress your career. And it's still an attractive league to go. You're playing with some of the world's best coaches alongside some of the world's greatest players. And you will still be attractive to come back to the Premier League.
Yeah, it's funny. Ever since I read this question, I've had this phrase in my mind, which I remember Jim Palotto, when he was owner of Roma, kept saying to me whenever I talked to him about the project there, he said, "It's Rome, stupid." And like, not saying that like to me, but that's like his sales pitch basically, was he was like, this has to work. Like, it's going to work because it's Rome. Like, people are not capitalizing on the fact that it's Rome and everyone wants to come to Rome, and look at the tourist appeal that we've got and all these things on our doorstep. I never know. Again, it's the same as perhaps the conversation we had on the main podcast this week about Lorenzo Insigne and going to Toronto. Maybe it is an influence for some footballers think, you know what, wow, let's go to Rome and live in Rome for a little while. What an amazing experience. And perhaps that's some part of it. It's certainly a big profile club. Roma have a club that have international success in their past, and that will capture some players' attention. I agree with you about Mourinho's profile, and I think that's really fascinating because actually, as we've also talked about, Mourinho is just throwing his players one at a time under the bus this season. It's like, under you go. You know whose fault it is? Not this guy. So it's your fault, your fault, and your fault. And do you really like, is that attractive to like go somewhere and get told that you're the reason that Mourinho's career is going off the tracks? But I think that players do still buy into the idea of him as a big manager and someone who has done things in their career, and that still makes sense to me, actually, even with the sort of the stuff that he says sometimes being so frustrating. Like, in the end, there are almost no other managers in world football. Only a very, very tiny pool of the most elite managers can say, yeah, I've done the things that Jose's done. I've won the Champions League. I've won Serie A and the Premier League and you know, all these things. So of course he has experience and things that he can impart, even if his overall style seems to be less effective now than it used to be. Of course, there are still things you can learn from a person who's done that in their career. So for sure, I think he's a big part of it still. But, you know, I do think it's probably really important as well that someone has set the example and done it. You know, when Chris Smalling went, it felt more like a bit of a oh, you know, it's a brave choice going somewhere and being the one English player there. And then Tammy Abraham follows it. And then you know that both of them have actually done pretty well in Rome. Smalling has had a good time in Rome. Tammy Abraham is on fire at the moment. And so if you're Maitland-Niles, you look at it and you go, well, I'm going to go to a dressing room where I know there's going to be at least two other English speakers, both of whose careers have been furthered by being there. And Mourinho speaks English as well. So I'm not worried about the manager trying to teach me things that I don't get. Sure. Like it's enough good stuff in that picture to make it seem attractive. So I think it's a collection of lots of different things, and probably also to spin it around the other way. You know, you've got a manager who has recent Premier League experience who's probably looking to the Premier League more, and that's why some of those deals come to be as well. It's in that chicken and egg conversation. It's both the chicken and the egg, I guess. So that is all we've got time for in this week's Q&A mailbag.
They were really interesting questions, guys, so please do keep them coming in. We hope you enjoyed the Serie A Chronicles Q&A, our first of 2022. Join our Patreon and become a Chronicles Tifosi at patreon.com/Serie A Chronicles to get access to exclusive podcast episodes and bonus content, all coming up for you in this new year. Get your questions in on Twitter at Serie A Chronpod with the hashtag Chronicles Q&A. Please keep them coming. We really do love answering them. Find both of us on Twitter at Nikki Bandini and at Mina Rizuki. And subscribe to the Serie A Chronicles YouTube channel for clips of the show. Leave us a rating and a review. Make sure they're obviously beautiful and outstanding and we're the best people on the planet. Otherwise, don't leave a review. And you can do that on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode, and we hope to hear you on our main show on Tuesday. Speak then. Ciao for now.
I got sent that, and I basically just sent it to my mum because I knew she wanted to see it.
Me too. I sent it to my mum as well. We really love our mums.
My mum won't let me know. Like, my mum is, low-key stalker half the time. She's always checking what I'm doing. So I know.
Too. Oh no, my mum's a proper troll, by the way. I love her. My mum's like that 75-year-old troll going, this is terrible advice to people who say something on Twitter. Don't listen to this woman. She's crazy. And I'm like, Mom. And she has thousands of followers.
I love the idea that your mum's out there replying to posts just going, Penaldo.
Yeah, you just know. You just know that's what she is. And you know what? She won't actually give us her Twitter name because it's a secret. And she's famous. You don't understand. She's got thousands of followers, yeah? And she has now fully put her iPad on 1,000 securities that we can't even look at it. And I swear to you, I feel like she's there was once where I uploaded a picture and I just got a comment that said, take it down. Yeah. And I know that's her. And she's not telling me because if she doesn't like a picture, she's so mean.
Sports Social Podcast Network.
With Lucky Land Slots, you can get lucky just about anywhere.
Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to... Has anyone seen the bride and groom?
Sorry, we're here. We were getting lucky in the limo and we lost track of time.
No, Lucky Land Casino, with cash prizes that add up quicker than a guest registry.
In that case, I pronounce you lucky.
Play for free at LuckyLandSlots.com. Daily bonuses are waiting. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details.